Okay, welcome back to the Are You Strong show. I have an awesome guest on today. And before I say this young lady's name, I think I'm trying to think of the first time I met her. I think she was like 6 or 7 years old. Um, I have the pleasure and the honor to work with her father, Joe, um, for a long time now. And I've been hearing about this young lady's story, adventure, challenges in her academic and athletic career, for quite some time. But when you hear the story of this young woman who has overcome some pretty substantial challenges to go on to a very successful athletic career in a sport where I don't know how she does it. I really don't know how she does it. But super duper, what I call long distance swimming, super duper, which is really far, and I'm just excited to have this young lady on the show. But welcome to the show, Cassidy Mulligan.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
I am really excited, and just to let everybody know, I've been working with your dad. I don't even know how long I've been working with your dad. Long, long time, and you know when a dad is really proud of their kids is when they just don't stop talking about them, and your dad's got the gift of gab, which we all know, and he talks about you all the time. All the things, the good things you're doing, the challenges you faced, and I know your story, but I don't know as well what you're going to tell now. But I was telling your dad once I started this show that we got to get your daughter on here. We got to let the world hear your story. So before I start ripping all kinds of questions at you, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a senior this year at St. Peter's University, and I'm on the swim team. My specialty is distance and the 400 individual medley. I'm a triplet. I've got a brother and a sister who are my age. And I was born and raised in Old Bridge, New Jersey. And I guess a little fun fact is my favorite music genre is heavy metal and rock and roll.
All right, rock and roll. So who's your band?
Probably either Metallica or Avenged Sevenfold are my top two.
Okay, Sandman,
Say that
right?
again. Sorry.
Sandman, the song Metallica
Yep.
Sandman.
Enter
That
Sandman. Yep.
that is like the greatest song.
Yeah, actually, this year for our senior meet, all of the seniors get to pick a song for their walkout song, and I'm between Enter Sandman and a couple other Metallica songs for mine.
You got to go with Sandman.
Yeah, I found some others that are close, but
All right.
nothing has piqued my interest like that one yet.
Yeah, and I played football in college, and I think there's a couple of schools. I think Virginia Tech uses that as their walkout song when the team
Mhm.
walks out. I think it's Virginia Tech, and man, it's just like so powerful playing that song, Sandman. You know,
Yeah, it'll be a good walkout song too when you hear it, and then myself at 5'1" walks out. That's usually not the image people think, but
Well, listen, it's not the size of the athlete, it's the size of the heart,
for sure.
right? Right. So let me start asking a couple of questions, and the first one is you've been swimming for a long time.
hmm
How old were you when you started? And how the heck did you get into this super long distance swimming?
So the first time I joined a team, I was 7 years old. But I had started taking lessons well before then, probably around 3, 4 years old. My parents, in our friends' houses over the summer, going, in their pools and the beach. My parents were dragging me out of the water, and I was, they'd be like, "Cass, come on," and I was doing flips underwater, so I couldn't hear them, telling me to get out. So it was a pretty easy decision to get me into lessons, and I just fell in love with the water and swimming, and I had a great time. So we tried out for the team at 7 and I made it. And, the rest was history. But I actually personally was not a great swimmer for a long time. I was probably one of the slowest kids on my team until about 13. And one day, my coaches at the time had moved a bunch of my best friends into a faster practice group. And, I was so upset about being separated from them. I started working really hard at practice and trying to get moved up, and we found that, my natural talents weren't in sprints, but I could swim for a really long time and hold the same pace pretty well. So, after that, we started putting me in the longer events, and I ended up falling in love with it, and I haven't looked back since. So,
So how far do you swim now?
um, the shorter range of my events is 16 laps, and the longer range of my events is 66 laps, which is a mile.
66 laps. So that's like, that laps in the pool. That's like, so that's swimming around the athletic track outside 4 times.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And how long does that take from in a race perspective, and then when you're practicing?
In a race, it'll take me just under 19 minutes ish, so like 18:50 something. At practice, it'll probably be about mid 19. If we're really tired that day, maybe closer to 20, but
20. So, I have so many questions to ask you about that, but you know what? I'm going to save those for a little bit later because it's just mind-boggling that somebody can swim. Because I know when I'm in the pool, I swim across the pool, I'm exhausted, and you're going to go a mile, So when did you realize? I mean, swimming is it's a physically challenging sport, ridiculously physical, but it's also mental too. And we're going to talk about that down the road. Is where does your mind go when you're swimming for 20 minutes? But
mhm.
when did you realize that, you know what, I'm pretty good at this, and I think I can do this since college?
Probably about freshman or sophomore year of high school. When I was little, I think I used to write down, my future job would be an Olympic swimmer, but that was so far out of the realm of, I didn't know what that looked like. But somewhere around high school, when I started swimming for my high school team and my coaches started talking to me about college, they had kind of said, you have a real shot at this thing. You just got to keep working at it. And I said, okay. And, I knew I never wanted to quit swimming, but I wasn't exactly sure what that path for college looked like. But when I started looking at schools, I started, contacting their coaches and, asking like, hey, what's this all about? I heard it was a big commitment. I heard it was really hard. And I also heard that a lot of people quit before or very early on. So it was a little daunting, but something happened where, I had spoken to a coach on the phone and over email, and, he explained to me what the experience was like. And I had talked to some of my teammates who had gone to college and come back to visit us on their breaks. And, I was like, okay, this sounds like a lot of fun. And, eventually we started looking at my times in comparison to schools that I would be a good fit for. And I, gave it a real run at it.
Cool. So while you were in high school, you not only swam, but you were in ROTC,
Yes.
right? And can you just, I mean, that's difficult in itself on top of school. So you choose to you're in high school, you choose to be a swimmer, which is physically and mentally demanding. And they say, well, I'm going to go do ROTC on top of that. Talk about that experience and what it's like to manage all that. And what did you learn from being a swimmer and being in the military ROTC, which is how many kids in high school really do that? Maybe many go on to college and do it, but to do it in the high school level, that's unique.
Hmm. Yeah, honestly, very early on, in eighth grade, I think the ROTC program comes and they do a little presentation and they tell you, this is what you're about. You have to pick an elective, and this is what we do. And, going into high school, I knew, I've never been someone for, the conventional cooking or sewing, and, that I knew I definitely didn't want to do that. And, because I was an athlete, I loved working out and I loved running around. And my high school, our ROTC program had simulated an obstacle course for us. And that was the moment where I was like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. And also I just love the idea of it was a combination of doing community service and holding yourself to a higher standard than you had before. And, there were just so many little things about the program that I loved, but I had never considered going into the military. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I was like, all right, you know what? There's no commitment out of high school. Let me give it a shot. And if I like it, I like it. And, I ended up falling in love with it. just short of swimming, that was the best thing I ever did for myself in high school. I met some of my lifelong friends and it taught me so many skills. Like public speaking was something I definitely could not do before this. It also
You?
just
I mean, you got the gift of gab from dad. How will you be afraid of public speaking?
well, yeah, funny enough, I'm a big talker, but in front of people, that was a whole different story.
Okay.
I've never been shy, but I for any ounce of shyness in me was gone after ROTC for sure.
Okay. So what are the big things you learned from ROTC that like you're still using today?
I think one of the biggest things that I got out of it, was just not only confidence in the things that I knew I was good at, like swimming, or let's say I loved history in high school, so let's say history class, but just to be confident in myself as a person. It taught me that, to just trust my abilities and also just give everything your best shot. What's the word? It's a very corny saying, but like there's a saying that our instructor always used to say to us, which was, like shoot for the moon, you'll land among the stars. It just taught me, what's the worst that could happen? Just give everything your best shot, and regardless of the result, you should be proud of the effort you put in.
So was that as physically demanding too, the ROTC, other than the obstacle course where there's a lot of things they made you do every day, or how'd that work?
So it depended on the day of the week. We had a schedule that was the same every week. So like Monday, Tuesday were academic days. So we were learning about either the history of the military, or it was called like leadership education, or we were learning about aerospace science since we were an Air Force junior ROTC unit. So we were learning about airplanes and how they fly. Funny enough, I'm a forensic psychology major and criminal justice minor, but whenever
Cool.
I'm on a plane, I'm looking at it and I understand how the wings are working now. And that was just really cool. But then Wednesdays was our drill day. So you learned how to march and, be in a formation and how to move around. Thursdays was uniform day. So we wore a uniform and, you conducted an actual, your upperclassmen conducted an inspection and, tested you on your military knowledge. And
Wow.
Fridays was physical training. So the whole class period, you'd either be outside running or you'd be inside doing push-ups and sit-ups. And every couple weeks they would test you on your mile time, or, how many push-ups and sit-ups you could do in a minute, or other various activities. So it was a little bit of a combination of everything. It was challenging physically, academically, and mentally. So
Well, most kids would have just gone to school and done that, but you choose to swim on top of that. Now, did you play any other sports too, or just swimming?
just swimming. Earlier when I was young, I played softball for a while, but by the
Okay,
time I got to high school,
swimming.
it was swimming.
So how did you manage that? Swimming, ROTC, and school.
I didn't get a lot of sleep in high school, I'll tell you that. I was usually awake by 6 o'clock on my way to school. We had school till about 2:30, I think it was. And then I was staying after school every day for ROTC for different activities. And there's almost different things within the unit you could get involved in. Like I was our operations director at one point. So I was planning our military ball, and you had to go, we went to like the Grand Marquis. It's almost like planning a wedding, honestly.
Yeah.
So I was doing that till probably 3, 4 o'clock. And then I was going straight to swim practice after that from 5 to 7 or 8, depending on the day. And then coming home about 9, doing my homework, going to sleep, and repeat the next day.
You're just asking for pain, right?
I've always liked a challenge, that's for sure.
Well, it looks like you've lived up to them, I'll tell you that. So, recruiting process. Before we get to that, when did you realize, hey, you know what? I think I could really do this and do this really well in college.
Mhm. I think I was locked into that about my junior year. I had just finished our championship meet that year, and we were looking at my times, and I looked at, some of the schools I had started looking at, and, I was like, okay, I looked where I kind of lined up with the other, the swimmers who were at those schools, and I was like, I could give a couple of these girls a good run for their money in a year or two.
So recruiting process, how stressful was that? Coming out of high school, I know you wanted to go the military route. Want to
Mhm.
talk about that? But can you just give us an idea? Because there's so many young high school kids right now that are athletes. They're thinking about playing in college, and maybe the recruiting process hasn't started yet. Maybe it has, but can you kind of talk about that experience, what that was like, and how that went, where you started, what got in the way, and how you ended up where you are now, and to be so successful in what you're doing.
Yeah, so I think I started really looking at schools my sophomore year, but I was by my junior year, I had started emailing coaches. You you got some emails from various schools, but here in the US, there's hundreds of thousands of colleges, so it was a little bit of a combination of me doing my research about, what I wanted to major in and who had Division 1 swimming programs and a little bit of a combination of getting texts and calls from coaches. I think the hardest part about the recruiting process really was just, trying to make a good connection with not only these coaches, but the school as well. As much as a lot of these coaches will call you and say, I want you to swim for me. This is what the team is like. You also have to make sure the school is a good fit, the
Mm,
location's a good fit. At the end of the day, swimming has always been one of my biggest priorities, but you are going to get a college degree too. So you
yeah.
gotta, it's a balancing act of trying to make sure that every little puzzle piece fits for you. So I think that was the hardest part when talking to coaches, trying to also get, not only a picture of their swimming team, but a picture of the whole school too.
Yeah. Now, again, I've known your dad forever. Um, some parents are very involved in the recruiting process. Some parents don't want to be involved because their son or their daughter is just so focused and they don't really need the direction. How were you in that? Were you looking to mom and dad for help there, or were you like, "Hey, I got this, man. I don't really need I could use their thoughts, but I'm good here."
I was pretty on it myself. I don't even remember if I had really spoken to my parents much about all of the schools I was emailing. I know I think I said to my mom once while I was sitting down typing an email, she asked me what you doing. I was like, "Oh, emailing, I forget which school it was now, but I was
Yeah.
like emailing this coach from this school and she was like, "Oh, that's good," but there really wasn't a big conversation where I was like, help me figure out how to swim in
Yeah.
college. And, I just started telling them, oh, I got an invite from this coach to go, for a visit here. And they were kind of like, okay, I guess we're going.
Let's
And,
go. That's great. So how did you narrow that down? How did you say, well, you said before, it's not just picking the swimming team, it's picking the right school for the right fit. So what criteria did you have? What were you looking for to say, hey, that's a good fit for me?
from, from a far away point, at least over like a computer and just doing research, I had three things that I wanted. I knew I was going to major in psychology, so they had to have a good psychology program. I knew I was going to swim, and at that, I was like, I think I could do well at the Division 1 level. So I was looking at Division 1 schools. And then I also, out of high school, really wanted to go into the military. So each college had to either have an ROTC program that worked well, or where I ended up going was a military school. So everybody there was looking to go into the military, or at least to have that experience while they were in college.
Okay. So can we talk about that?
Sure.
That initial, okay, if you're comfortable mentioning the school, that's great. Um, and how that initial recruiting process went there. What was the attraction there? And then when you got there, what happened?
Yeah. So at some point, the school I ended up at originally was the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, Virginia. I actually had gotten a letter from them in the mail at not the swim team, but the school. And I had brushed it off, my sophomore, junior year at first. I was like, nah, I don't, no military school. And I think my mom actually may have placed it somewhere else because she did not originally want me to go into the military.
Yeah.
And I found them through my own research again. And as I was going through letters, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like I've heard this name before. And I started looking into it, and they had a psychology program. They had a Division 1 swim team, and they're what you would call a senior military college. So they're not one of the major branch academies, but they're a school where you go there and it's military lifestyle 24/7. You walk around in uniforms, you live in barracks instead of dorms. And everybody there chooses a branch of college ROTC to do. And, it's a part of your everyday life. And it was a little scary at first. I was like, this is so far out of the realm of what I'm used to. I don't, my immediate family, no one's in the military. That was a
Yeah.
lifestyle with the exception of doing junior ROTC in high school, didn't really know much about the actual, what that would be like living it 24/7. And I had reached out to the swim coach there and he got back to me pretty quickly and we started talking. And I think I may have reached out to him. I think it was August of my junior year and I was on an official visit in September. It was a couple weeks later, which was very scary for my parents because that was a quick turnaround. But honestly, I went there and I fell in love with it. I loved that everybody, all the kids there, at the end of the day, they were all so dedicated to, doing well in life and also doing well for other people too, that,
Yeah.
seeing that in, college kids is crazy. I was like,
Yeah.
these kids are only a few years older than me and they were so well put together and motivated. And, I think my dad may have seen when I walked up to, the barracks where I met the girl who was hosting me for the weekend and the coach. I think my eyes like lit up. Like it was
Yeah.
like it was perfect. And, I stayed for I think it was a day and a half or two. And I slept over in the barracks, so I got to sleep
Yeah.
overnight and see what that was like. And, came back home, talked to my parents about it, and I was set, I think, before I even left that weekend. I was like, this is gonna be a hard conversation to have with my mom, but
Yeah.
like I want to go there. And um, after that, talked to the coach for a couple more months. He had made me an offer and I committed by the end of my junior year. So it
Wow.
was, and it was just, it felt like where I needed to be at the time. And
Yeah.
it was great. And I prepared my senior year. I was running, I was working out, I was swimming. They give you a nice laundry list of things you need to bring with you, like, white or black socks and,
Yep.
a toothbrush, toothpick, they give you the list of things you can and you cannot bring. And I was ready to go. So August, my freshman year of college, you go and I believe it's the first 11 days, if I remember correctly, is something they call Hell Week, which is essentially your little orientation. It's meant to give you some, a little bit of a shock factor. They
Yep.
wake you up early every day. You're working out all day. You're learning the ropes of what being at a military school is like. So my parents, they said goodbye to me. They watched it. The first thing you do when they get there is they call you down by class and they march you off. Nobody knows how to march at that point yet, but you try your best.
Yeah.
Um, Also, that's why junior ROTC helped a little bit, but I was also like, all right, let's not show off either because I knew enough that that would get me in some trouble too. And they take your phone from you. You're not allowed to have your phone your freshman
Oh
year.
boy.
So, I said goodbye to my parents, walk down, they march you into the barracks and they immediately start yelling. um, I experienced something like that with a couple of the programs I got to do in high school, but that was like the real deal.
Real life.
Yeah, and it was, even for someone like myself who was kind of prepared for that, it was definitely a little intimidating. You walk in and, the upperclassmen who marched you over there are yelling in your face, but also in the barracks, there's like 4 levels and the inside is like almost like a courtyard. And everybody else, all the upperclassmen who aren't, actively yelling at you are all up there like chanting and they all have class rings. They're hitting their rings on the
Yeah.
railing and it
It's
definitely
intense.
delivers that shock. Yeah.
Oh my God.
um and then right after that they take you down to the barber shop. You get your hair cut. The guys get their hair buzzed. The girls, it depends on the year how much they cut or do or don't. Or they'll put in a ponytail for you the way you're supposed to have it. And it's go 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 from there. um and then I don't remember exactly, but the rest of the night they feed you. You start working on you have to like label all of your clothes with like the number they gave you and your last name. So you start working on that. They teach you how to make your bed, which is called a hay because it's like a wooden plank and then a like almost like a foam, not foam, but it's not a very thick mat, but a mat that goes on top that you roll up
Yep.
every morning. And you meet the people who are in your barracks room with you, which is like 4 or 5 people in a room. And you start trying to learn how to do everything. And they give you your rap Bible, which is a little book that has everything you need to know about being there and everything they're going to quiz you on, and you start reading it. And then we went to bed, and they wake you up bright and early the next day. You're trying to figure out in a panic how to make this hay that you have no clue how to roll up. And, they're like, let's go, outside, you sleep in the clothes you're about to do your physical training in so that you just get up and go.
Yep.
Um, and they take you outside and they line you up, and we went for a run. We were supposed to run from the barracks through I forget if it was a trail of some sort, and then they lead you to fields where you do physical training. But um, while we were on that run, I rolled my ankle because I don't know what time it was, but the sun was not up and the moon was still pretty high in the sky. So I'm going to assume it was early in the morning. So I didn't see there was a tree branch in front of me where I was running. And I had rolled my ankle, and I continued to run for a couple more steps, but from adrenaline, I think I didn't feel it at first, but all of a sudden I started limping a little bit, and then I really couldn't run anymore, and my ankle was really hurting, and someone was yelling at me to keep running, and I like kind of was like, I'm not slowing down. I can't run anymore. And you know, I stopped running. They had the EMTs who follow you on a golf cart come over and look, and we took my shoe off, and my ankle was big and turning colors, and we were
Oh
like, all
boy.
right, this isn't good. So I went to the post hospital that's there, which is like a little hospital doctor they have on campus. Um, and he looked at it, and they tried having me walk on it, and it wasn't working, and they gave me crutches, and they were like, this is definitely sprained. The severity they don't know. At that time we only looked at it externally. We didn't know if I had torn ligaments or tendons, or if I needed surgery, or what the deal was. We just knew I couldn't put any weight on it, so I wasn't walking, I wasn't running. And they had started asking me, did I have health insurance in Virginia? And I didn't at the time. So they said, all right, well, if I need x-rays and surgery, I'm gonna have to, contact my family, and we're gonna have to look at, what to do where my health insurance was, which was New Jersey. So I had called my family. Thankfully, they were still at the hotel. They hadn't left yet because it was still early, but they missed like the first 3 calls, actually. I was kind of sitting there, and I was like, well, what the heck do I do? Because everybody's staring at me like, so what's
Yeah.
the answer? And I was like, the answer is my family's still asleep, I think. So, I didn't call. I called everybody. I think because my whole family came to drop me off. So I called my mom, my dad, my brother, and my sister like twice. Nobody answered. Um, I left a message, and finally around 8 a.m. they had called back, and they came to talk to us, and we had talked to he was someone high up in the school. I forget who. Like, I don't want to say the president of the school, but somebody who was on an admin board of some sort. And he was talking to my parents, and he had said going home and recovering in New Jersey was the right decision. It was the smart way to go about this. I had even been told by not only him, but multiple kids there, when you get injured here, especially this early, it's so isolating, and, it's hard to go through that it's hard to go through that school and Hell Week in general, let alone with nobody else who can relate to you. You can't
Yeah.
do all of the things they're doing. And then some people start resenting you for that. You got to sit out of some of the stuff you're doing. So between the health insurance question, my parents being there, and a lot of shock, I ended up going home. So the very next day, we drove 8 hours back home to Old Bridge, New Jersey. Um, you got my ankle checked out, and I had gotten myself for at least that semester enrolled in Middlesex College online just to keep up with class credits. But then when I went to go figure out, all right, how do I get back to Virginia? I had called and I was asking questions, and I learned really quickly that I couldn't come back that next semester or even halfway through the first one. They had said, the first 8 months, 9 months, your freshman year, is almost run like basic training with school and your sport on top of it. It's all happening at the same time. So you can't just come back and skip portions of that. You need to be there for all of it. So they said you could come back, but you have to come back next August, end of August, early September, and start over. And even then I had said, okay, well, so then my class credits, from Middlesex, I wanted to stay on top of it so I wouldn't fall behind. How would that apply? And they said, well, you could have your class credits and maybe it'll help you later, but you have to start as a freshman. You don't, you have to do your 4 years here. That's how it works. So for me, who also was paying, I would have been paying, I think it was close to $50,000 a year at that school. I was like, whoa, like five
Yeah,
years for a 4-year degree and, an injury at that, it was
right.
shocking. I didn't know what to do. And it was scary too. I had committed there. I had fallen in love with that school. And, in the blink of an eye, because of a sprained ankle, I was home and couldn't go back. And if I was going back, I wasn't going back for a whole year.
So, you know, I don't know how you handled that, mentally, because that was seemed to be like your dream shot,
Hmm.
right? Well, everything was kind of rolled up a nice little ball with a bow on it, you know, and then all of a sudden you're told, oh, you can't have it, right? So now you're sitting at home, your ankle's a mess, it's healing up. You put some classes in, you thought you were on track, then they turn around, drop a bomb on you, no pun intended, military, right? They drop a bomb on you, and now you got to make up your mind, like, what the heck am I going to do now? So I can just picture you sitting in your bedroom at home with all this going on in your mind, and you're only 18 years old, probably.
Hmm.
What was going on in your head then?
There was so much good. I I don't think I had ever been so occupied by thoughts 24/7. For one, I was scared for sure. I was always a kid who had a 5 and a 10-year plan, and all of a sudden within 48 hours I didn't know what I was doing in a couple weeks. It was scary. It was also really hard because like you said, that was like my dream school. They had everything I wanted. I loved it when I went there. I had made connections with some of the other kids who were there and some of my teammates. And then all of a sudden, because of a chance injury too, like at the time, I was beating myself up. I was like, maybe if I had looked down, I would have seen the branch or, I was like, what are the odds that just with my stride, I happened to land I was the only person who landed on that branch out of, however many hundreds of us there were, I was like, I didn't know what to do. And then also too, it was really, I think at the time I was embarrassed about it because I had told all my friends and family. They had,
Mm,
wished me goodbye. I was going to do this incredible thing. And all of a sudden, 48 hours later, my family and friends are calling my mom, like, how was it? Like, what's going on? And my mom was like, well, she's back home. And, to me at the time, I was like, I feel like I failed, it was
yeah.
really hard. And even get like the bombardment of texts and phone calls I was
Oh,
getting asking about it. I definitely wasn't ready to talk about it because also that everybody was like, so what now? And I was like, yeah, what now? Somebody help me. I don't know what happens now. So it was really there was a lot going on in the days after. Even I distinctly remember at one point I was in the car with my mom and my sister. And my sister very gently, just out of concern, had asked me, I think it was I forget if it was a couple days or a couple weeks. She asked me, so what are you going to do now? And I just started crying because I was so
mm,
overwhelmed and stressed. I didn't know what to do. And talking about it at the time made it 20 times worse.
right. Now, I don't know if everybody heard in the beginning, but you said you're a triplet,
Hmm.
right? Which is really cool. And you hear all these things. Well, if you're a triplet, they can feel your pain. They almost can they know there's something going on, even if you're not with them. I don't know. Did any of that happen? How was your brother and your sister when it came to coming to you and I don't know, say rescue but were they have a lot of questions of their own? Hey, what happened? Why? How come? What's going on? Or were they like, hey, whatever you need, we'll make it work?
Yeah, so my brother, sister, and I are completely different people for one. So
Okay.
I think the way we even attack something like that, our emotional responses are very different. My sister was almost, she was very invested in asking questions. She was trying to offer suggestions, she was a problem solver. Um,
Okay.
which at, it was a lot at the beginning, but in hindsight, that meant so much to me that my sister still believed in me and was like, all right, well, how
Mm.
about, can you go back? Can you go somewhere else? Can you, she was just trying to help. And then my brother is much less, he's not as loud about, talking about emotions and things like that. But my brother, he's got this great sense of humor. And, I don't think he'd ever admit it, but my brother for sure, if somebody's upset, like lays it on thick. And,
Yeah,
my brother was just, he knew I didn't want to talk about it. And I don't think he wanted to talk about it either. But, he was almost there just to be my brother, which also is something I needed at the time too.
that's so cool. So, okay, we're not going back to VMI. How did you figure out what was next?
Well, it took a while, and there was a little bit of a sense of panic when I was like, okay, I need to get myself enrolled in the spring at Middlesex to make sure I'm still, taking classes and will graduate in 4 years. But then there was this moment around November, December where it really hit me. I was like, I need to figure out if I don't want to stay at Middlesex, which I didn't. I was like, I still want to swim. I still want to go to a normal college. I was like, I gotta get my butt in gear and start doing this recruiting process again, which, I think any college athlete will tell you, as fun as it is, that was a nightmare realizing that. I was like, I have to not only start calling up coaches. I was like, I have to get myself in the transfer portal. I had to go back on the phone with people from the NCAA and VMI to make sure that I was able to redshirt for my freshman year. So I got that year of eligibility back. Um,
You did all this by yourself.
yeah,
Jeez.
which,
No
yeah,
coaches, no nothing. Just
yeah, there was a lot of confusion. Most of the time I was like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I was, worried. I was like, what if I lose that year of eligibility. Not that I even knew I was going to use it or not, but I was like, I still want to have the option to use it. Um, it was scary. And by some miracle, one of the girls I grew up with, and I swam with her on a team, went here to St. Peter's. And she, at some point, I had, you know, I think later on, I don't know what month it was, I started very slowly getting back in the water once my ankle was okay. Because swimming is great on your joints. There's no pressure. It's not like running. So I was like, all right, you know what? I could, even if I just pull and I use my arms and I don't kick, I want to start getting back in. And she was home for the weekend and she ran into me and she was like, I didn't know you're home. And I was like, yeah, that's a long story. I sprained my ankle. I came home, can't go back now. Or I could, but it's not, it wasn't realistic for me to go back. So, I was like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing now. And her whole face lit up. She goes, well, guess what? We have a Division 1 swim team at St. Peter's. We have a psychology program. It's in New Jersey. And at the time, their team, their old coach had quit. So their team was starting to struggle with numbers. So she was like, we could sure use a distance swimmer on our team. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me. I looked around a little bit, but again, St. Peter's just checked all those boxes. They
yeah,
had my major. They also had forensic psychology, which was different than regular psychology. And,
yeah.
growing up, I had always loved criminal justice, but I didn't really want to be a police officer. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. So forensic psychology really sounded incredible. And also to be looking at anything in the realm of criminal justice in a city like Jersey City, there's
Perfect.
so many opportunities, yeah, for jobs, for internships, or even just to have a good educational experience there. I was like, okay. And they had a swim team and the military thing was up in the air. That was the other thing that I was like, I really want to do this. Um, and I kind of at the time still I was like, all right, the coming home from VMI and not going back threw a wrench in that plan. But I honestly at that point started questioning. I was like, well, is that what I want to do? Something happened when I came home and, I started thinking about my family who had just helped me through so much. Beforehand, I was like, all right, I'll write them some letters and,
Yeah.
afterwards they'll be able to talk to me on FaceTime and, it's fine. But all of a sudden, because of that experience, I became so much closer with them that I was like, I don't really know if I want to be away from them for months and months at a time. Um, he said my dad with the gift of gab pre VMI, I was like, yes, please, I need a break. But now even now when I go home on the weekends, I'm always, talking to them or trying to arrange being home when people are home.
Yeah.
So I started really wondering, I was like, I don't know if I want to go into the military and be away all the time. So I was like, all right, well, you could always change your mind. You could always, commission as an officer. There's
Yeah.
other routes you could take. It wasn't my first plan, but I could, I was like, all right, let's pump the brakes there. And, if this other school is going to make me happy, and, at the time, you only, unless you're an Olympian, you only swim till the end of college. I was like, maybe I should look at doing that and where I can still do that. And, we can figure out post college, post
Yeah.
college.
And it's a place where your parents and your brother and sister can come watch if they want,
Yeah, which was
which is
different
big.
too. When I was going to VMI, if my parents were coming to watch, they're in a conference. VMI is in a conference with NJIT. So on the off chance that we swam them here in New Jersey, my parents could come watch. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I was like, where they're not going to be driving to Virginia to watch me
Yeah.
every day. That's a long. It's where VMI was realistically 8.5, 9 hours away from our house. So,
Yeah.
my parents would also get the chance to be more involved in, swimming and watching me swim. So
Yeah.
that was another, yeah, that was definitely another benefit to being here.
And you get, and obviously you see the posts your dad puts out there, which are great,
And
you know?
yeah, again, it's funny. Before VMI, my dad used to be taking these pictures and posting things, and I hated it at the time for
Yeah.
whatever, I think you're just a teenager.
Yeah.
Teenagers are hard, but now I love it. I see it and I'm like, oh, that's a really cool picture of me
Yeah.
swimming. And
Right.
now it's very different.
Oh yeah. And your dad's so proud of it too. He loves it,
Yeah,
which
and
is really great.
my dad and my mom and how supportive they have been definitely have helped so much throughout
Yeah.
this. They every time I've been overwhelmed or oh, I want to do this, they never, not once have they looked at me and gone, no. Like every
Yeah.
single time they're like, all right, that's what you want, go for it.
Yeah.
They've always been my biggest supporters with everything I've done.
That's awesome. So now you're at St. Peter's. What did you learn from that whole mess of getting there?
I think it definitely taught me to be more adaptable. I think I
Hmm.
had always thought like, oh, I handled pressure and stress well, but I definitely did not realize how much of a routine is routine and that's the only thing I know kind of person. It definitely taught me to go with the flow more. It also just taught me life is not going to be predictable. And, at first I was like, that's the worst part about life. And now I'm like, you know what? Things happen for a reason and you end up where you need to be at the end of the day. So however you get there is however you get there.
So if you could look back on that, is there anything you would do different? That whole challenging episode that took place, was there anything you would do different?
Honestly, actions wise, I don't think there is anything I would have or could have done different. But the only thing now looking back, I just wish I wasn't so hard on myself the whole time. The whole time I was thinking, I was like, I failed at this. Like, really, I mean, all military schools have a big no quit mentality, but I personally have a big no quit mentality. So I really was beating myself up for that for a long time. And even going to St. Peter's, I was like, all right, like, it's St. Peter's. It's not my first choice, but it'll do. And, I wish, now looking back, I'm like, I wish I just would have looked at myself in the mirror and been like, all right, here's the second shot. Like, just, let the past be in the past. You did what you could and move on.
But that's hard for young people to do. Like you said, let the past be in the past. Because many people, I don't care, 18, 19, 22, 52, they still are living in the past. It's hard to let it go,
Yeah,
right? So St. Peter's has been a great spot for you.
definitely.
And it's hard to, I ask this on every athlete that I talk to, and it's hard sometimes to find that one, but is there any one memorable moment while you're at St. Peter's as an athlete, as a student, as a friend of people, wherever, that just stands out and say, man, this was great.
I think actually I may have finally had that moment this year. My team grew in size this year significantly. The women's team the last 2 years has had a very small roster, but it was after my first swim meet this year, and we had swam at NJIT. And we swam Howard University and NJIT and the University of Vermont. And I looked around and I had swam a couple races. I swam the 500 freestyle, which is 20 laps, the 400 IM, and a couple other off events just to, get a feel for racing. And I finished my race. I had talked to my coach and I looked around and I was like, I'm having fun. And as an athlete, that's a weird thought to have because I've always swam and, being a swimmer is a part of my identity. And, I tell everybody I love swimming. Swimming has made me who I am. It's such a big part of my life. I've got a mermaid tail tattoo on my
Do
calf
you?
that says
Oh,
just
that's
keep
cool.
swimming, which was my tribute to swimming. Um, but, looking around, I was like, I'm having fun. And not only am I having fun, I'm having fun because of my teammates and because of my coach and because of where I am right now. And it kind of clicked that, I had when I got to St. Peter's, it was a little bit of a culture shock. I had never lived in a city. So my first year was a little rough. I didn't, love the city life, sleeping at night, you hear sirens, it's
Oh yeah.
loud. Um, my junior year was a little bit better, but really this was the first year where I was like, I love this school, I love this team, and I ended up where I needed to end up.
That's so cool. You know, for somebody who has faced such adversity, like you said before, most kids would just quit. Oh, like given up on the dream of swimming and figured out how to get through county college somehow and get something done and be done. To get back on the or I should back on the horse isn't the right thing. Get back in the pool, let's say, for lack of better words,
Hmm.
and to keep pushing, keep swimming, and ending up where you're at. That's pretty cool stuff. So here's a question: is younger athletes that made their decision to go to college, they've gone through the recruiting, they picked the school, the coach, and the team, and all this kind of cool stuff. What advice can you give to them to prepare them for that day one on campus? Holy smokes, look what's going on here.
I think if I could say anything to, younger athletes who are about to swim in college and have that experience or even play a sport for that matter, I'd say just take it day by day. It does. I'm a senior now. It flies. This has been one of the best experiences of my life. And, I'd say just take it all in and enjoy it while you're there and enjoy it from day one, because
Mm,
it'll fly by. And one day, you are going to look around and go, maybe you're an adult at 18, but you're a real adult. You got a job and, you might not have the time to swim or play your sport every single day or the opportunity to do so.
yeah,
So, I'd just say, go for it and enjoy it while you have it.
cool. So you're at St. Peter's now, loving life, having fun. Any setbacks there? Any challenges you face there that have been, hey, these are pretty high hurdles I got to jump over.
I think the hardest thing since being here was, at least in the pool, was trying to get back to my times from before I hurt myself. Because I was a senior in the class of 2021. So my senior season of swimming in high school got thrown away because of COVID and the end of my junior year. So I, in essence, really had almost like a 2 year break from being able to train and compete consistently. So getting back in the pool and, also at that, by the time I was a sophomore, I was 22, I'm trying to beat my times from when I was 16, 17 years old. That's in the world of swimming, that's a huge gap.
Yeah.
And also, I was like, literally, I was like, I'm in a different mind, a different body with the injuries. It was daunting to show up to practice every day because it was a slow start. It was hard. My sophomore year, I was trying to do things at practice that just weren't working anymore. I couldn't, the intervals you would hold for a set, I was like, I don't understand. 2, 3 years ago, this would have been easy. And I feel like I'm having a heart attack over here trying to keep up. So it was really hard. And to also
So
even
how did you fix that though? How did you go from I can't do this, it's really hard heart attack to the elite level that you're at now?
you just show up the next day and try again.
Mm,
It's swimming is one of those sports where our schedule is, I don't think a lot of people understand what, unless you're a swimmer, what a college swim training schedule looks like. Um, we swim 6 days a week. Uh, and at that we swim in the morning from 5:45 to 8, Monday through Friday. And then we also swim Saturday morning from 7:45 to 10. But then we also have a second practice in the afternoon every day. So Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, I swim for another 2 hours in the afternoon. And then Tuesday, Thursdays, lift weights for an hour in the
jeez.
afternoon. So it was more about just, all right, I made it through this practice and it wasn't great. I've got another one in 4 hours, practice to practice, day to day. You just got to keep trying.
Keep trying. I mean that is so cool. So let me ask you this one. You practice in the morning, you go to class, practice in the afternoon, then you're in the pool for 20 minutes at a shot, I'm gonna guess, swimming that long mile.
Hmm.
Are you doing your homework in your mind while you're in there swimming? Like, what are you doing in there for that 20 minutes while you can't talk to anybody and you're just swimming?
Yeah, it definitely depends if, I'm racing or practicing the mile. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
But I'm while I'm swimming, swimming is so technical that I'm thinking about what I should be doing. When I'm swimming, I almost picture if I'm like looking down at myself swimming. So I'll be like, okay, do I need to rotate my hips more? All right. I know my coach is probably looking at me telling me to dolphin kick, for another kick off each wall. And, okay, we said after 20 laps that I need to pick up the pace. And, it's really I'm really thinking through my race and what can I do. And also racing and swimming in general is very painful. You said it earlier that after a lap you're tired.
Oh
So am
yeah.
I. Swimming is one of those sports where, yeah, maybe it gets a little easier, but swimming is never comfortable.
Where,
You're holding
where
your
are you
breath.
where are you feeling the pain? Is it in your lungs? Is it in your arms, in your legs? Is it everywhere? Like
It's
where do you feel it when
everywhere.
you're swimming?
It's everywhere because I mean you're holding your breath, which, and like I said, don't get me wrong, some of these things get better over time. Your ability to hold your breath for X amount of time gets easier. But if you're pushing yourself in a race or pushing yourself at practice, it hurts. You're using your core muscles, your leg muscles, your shoulders, your arms, your back, and also at the same time, mentally, something, that never gets easier is fighting I could just take a breath and it would be so much easier. Everybody,
Mm.
when you're wanting air, it's that feeling is the same. If you were to hold your breath for 20 seconds, you feel the way I feel, when you want that breath. Maybe it takes a little longer for me now because I've been swimming for so long, but
How
that
long can you
feeling,
go? How long can you go with no breath?
when you're a little kid, you always used to like hold yourself under the
Yeah.
water with your
Yeah.
friends and
Yeah.
test it out. I haven't done that in a long time, but when I was younger, it used to be over a minute. So I'm going to assume it's probably closer to a minute and a half now. But
So if you're in the pool, do you actually go that long without breathing?
in a race, no, you gotta, or even in practice, you breathe every few strokes. But, sometimes we do like breath control and, because it does help you. Because in a race, if you do a sprint event, or even if you just want to get off the wall fast, breathing takes more time. Every breath you take adds seconds. So if you can go without breathing, you are better off. So sometimes we'll do a drill almost where you push off the wall and you kick and you're supposed to make it the whole way without a breath, or the whole way and a half, or 2 laps, or
Yeah.
even my coach will say, you're going to do 4 laps and one breath per lap, which honestly hurts a little more than even holding your breath for one, trying to
Yeah.
maintain something like that.
I'm
So
getting tired listening to you talk about it.
yeah. And even I don't really test it because outside of here I train lifeguards, so I'm a little anti hold your breath for as long as you can because I
Right,
watch
right.
people try to do it and
Yeah.
it's not great, but yeah, I don't know exactly what my lung capacity is like, but I'm sure it's over a minute still.
It's way above the average, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, you work on it every day. It
Yeah.
comes to you eventually.
So two practices, school. Like, how do you balance the academic life, the athletic life, the personal life? How do you choose what to prioritize first, second, third? Like, how do you put all that into like a plan?
I think it's funny you said a plan because that is one of the, I think, most debated topics among athletes and swimmers at that. Because, everybody who's looking at you says, okay, just map out your day. Just set aside time, like time management, you hear all the time, which, yes,
Yeah.
it's very important. But you hear all the time, just like write it down, do this from this time. And realistically, that's not that's not going to work for everybody. For me, sometimes I finish practice and maybe I was supposed to do homework from 8:30 to 9:30, but if practice was really really hard,
You're out
you
of
just
gas.
yeah, you just got like swimming is so physically and mentally tiring that sometimes you just got to sit there and kind of, stare at a wall, listen to some music, do whatever you
Yeah.
got to do to get through that next hour. So, for me, I think it's always been I'm better off if I can manage my energy that I can fit more in. Even in high school, like I said, it was go, go, go from like 6 a.m. to 8, 9 p.m. I was like, having a lot to do is not the problem, but trying to manage my energy to do all of it
Yeah.
is, the hard part. And I do to some extent. I plan out like, okay, I should do my homework at this time and, this due date is here. I should work on it. But for me, it's more of managing how am I going to have the energy at
Yeah.
7 to 10 p.m. to do my homework and then go to sleep.
Can let's drive that a little deeper because that, you know, you are so right. Everybody, all the athletes, time management, time management, time management. You're the first person I've ever heard say energy management,
Mhm.
which is so true. So, and some people are better in the morning, they're better at night, better in the afternoon. You know, can you talk about that for a second? Because there's the regular traditional students, right, that are walking around Jersey City on campus. They're sitting in class with you. They're out having a good time with you. They're whatever. They're just out there doing their typical thing. And then there's you, right? You're walking with them. You're talking with them. You're eating with them. You're going to class with them. And then you got to go get in that damn pool.
Yeah.
And then you got to manage the energy to figure out how the heck can I do my homework now? Study for a test without be while you're completely exhausted. Talk about how you manage that as a student athlete. Really, and I say, are you really a student athlete or athletic student?
That is very debatable.
Right.
The answer you're supposed to always give is student athlete, but it
Right.
doesn't always feel like that for
No.
sure. And it is hard when, yes, maybe, in the grand scheme of things, your goal is supposed to be, get the degree, prioritize that, and then also swim. But when you're swimming and you're exhausted and you come back, and you got all this homework and studying to do, you're like, I really don't want to, even though logically I'm a student athlete, this is my responsibility. And you have to do okay in the classroom to play a sport. There's this
Yeah.
misconception that athletes have it easier off because they're, an
No
athlete,
way. No way.
but there's a GPA requirement. You have to keep your grades up or you'll be on probation and you can't play your sport. So for me, a lot of managing my day to day, juggling practices and homework and, even just classes on top of that too, is making sure I get enough sleep at night for one. My alarm goes off every day at 4:45. So
Are you kidding me? Oh my
yeah,
God.
on the weekdays at least 4:45. It's about probably 6:45 on the weekends. But, it's I have to do a little math backwards. I'm like, all right, well, let's say the average college student goes to sleep at midnight. I'm like, well, that's not going to cut it. That's not even 5 hours, and let's say the average adult needs 7, 8 hours. That's the average adult who's not swimming for 4 hours a day. So I'm like, all right, let's say the goal is 9 hours and you start doing the math. I'm like, all right, we're looking at like 8:45 when
You don't
I,
have a lot of time.
no, it's hard. Also, too, because, you know, let's say I get in bed at 9. I'm not asleep at 9. It takes a
Yeah.
couple minutes. So it takes a lot of almost doing some backwards math
Yeah.
to figure out, when you need to be asleep. So for one, I definitely make sure I sleep at night. But for two, I also try to make sure, energy isn't just from sleeping. Energy is from eating the right things. You
Mm.
have to fuel yourself. Even as an athlete who swims for 4 hours a day, 3 meals a day isn't cutting it.
Not enough.
I wear an Apple Watch when I swim, and it tells you how many calories you burn off per practice. And I don't know if it's super, super accurate, but I use it as a gauge just to, it's telling me per practice I'm burning close to 600 calories. I mean, that's 1,200 calories a day. It's a lot. So I also try to make sure I'm eating 3 hearty meals a day, but also with a lot of small protein packed snacks in between. But also something too that I feel like, so okay, you need energy from sleep, you need energy from food. Something I feel like a lot of people don't consider where you get your energy from, and something that took me a long time to figure out, that I really only feel like I've started to get a handle on it maybe this year, my senior year, is you also need to do things outside of swimming and school and homework and sleeping that you enjoy.
Yeah.
You need to take the time to do the things you like. Otherwise, you're going to feel like you just wake up, swim, school, sleep, repeat. You have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, not just physically, but doing things you enjoy. Like, I love reading. I make sure I sit down and I read at least for a half hour every day. Because even, all right, 2 practices didn't go well. I had an exam that I didn't feel, but I read today, or I listened to music today. I mentioned earlier, I'm a big rock and roll and heavy metal
Rock and roll.
person. Yeah. So I always make sure that I try to do one thing for myself every day too, so that even if you have a hard practice, you feel tired, you're still doing something for yourself. And I find that beyond sleep and food helps with my energy levels and my motivation to keep doing that stuff a lot.
That is so cool. It's just I don't know how you do it. So how about this one then? How does competition, because it's intense, right? And you're traveling all over the place, jumping in the pool, swimming your brains out, getting back on you guys take any plane rides or all bus rides?
Well, we're taking a plane ride this January to go swim a meet and train in Florida.
All
So
right, so
mostly
that's
bus
good.
rides, but sometimes.
So how has competition, the competition of being a college athlete, you know, how has it brought out like the best in you and who you are? And how about has it done anything to bring out the worst?
So on the best note, I think, competing at the college level is it's so different compared to, high school or even, a club team before that, because, when you swim on a club team, it's just about trying to, you know, go the fastest time you can go and qualify for that next big meet. Competing here in college, you compete as a team, not only as an individual. So for me, competing, it's very stressful, but I've always loved the concept of teamwork and unity and doing things for others. Like I said, that's one of the things that drew me to VMI, like that, the camaraderie between everybody, and having that here when you're competing, knowing, all right, I'm not just racing for me or my time. I'm racing for all these girls who I watch work hard every day at 5:45 in the morning. That brings something out where even when I'm tired and my legs are shot and, I've got a girl right next to me and, we've been going for 60 laps and we've got six more. And I'm like, in your head, you're like, I'm just going to let her have it. Second place sounds great. Like like, it'll be okay. And we're both going to be done in 6 laps either way. But, in your head, okay, this hurts really bad. I'm tired. I want to take an extra breath. I'm just going to let this girl out touch me. I'm looking at my teammates and I'm like, but they didn't let that happen in their races. Or I watched them wake up yesterday when they were tired and work hard. So I'm going to do it right now here, not only for me, but for them too.
That is
And
so cool.
yeah, it's been, competing in college, while it's stressful, I almost find it easier to be a little more competitive here than it was, before. In high school, I'm competitive to some extent, but I never had that, like, if this girl next to me beats me, I'm gonna be mad. Like, if anything,
Right.
I always kind of grew up like, oh, she had a good race,
Yeah.
great. Like, even, which is funny because having siblings, you'd think it would, it'd be the
Yeah,
opposite, but I never had that drive where I didn't want to lose. But now I find it easier while competing in college to push myself because it's not just for me, it's for my teammates.
that is
But
all. I mean, yeah, as I'm looking down, I'm taking all kinds of notes as all this stuff you're saying, which is great. But you talked about, like you just said, compete as a team, teamwork, unity, camaraderie, swim for your teammates. I swim for your teammates. That is so cool. Because you're in a sport where you can be an individual,
hmm
right? And hey, if I got the great, I don't, if we lose, who cares? I had a great day.
hmm
But when you learn to swim for your team, compete for your team, that's when you know you're a true teammate. And I think that's when you realize you've grown up too.
Yeah, I think and this year I'm having that experience more than any other year. One, because the roster is so much bigger, but also two, I'm the only female senior on our team and I'm our team captain.
Wow.
But, having all these younger girls, watching them go through the things I've been through or, near similar, I'm looking at them and, it makes me work harder for them because, I look at them and I'm like, all right, I was in their shoes a couple years ago and they don't know it yet, but they're going to be in my shoes in 2, 3, 4 years, and it just makes it so much easier because I know they, at the end of the day, we all have this love for the sport. And not only the sport, but swimming is one of those sports where you have to love being comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have
Mm,
to love working hard. Nobody enjoys hearing their alarm at 4:45. Not one, even no matter how much sleep you get, nobody wakes up, especially now where it's like 20 degrees out when we walk to practice. Because that's the thing, too. You walk in the cold when it's raining, snowing, and then you dive into a cold pool. Nobody, if people tell you that, they're lying. Nobody
yeah.
wants to.
Nobody wants to do that.
But knowing that they do it too, and they do it every day with me, it
Yeah.
makes it so much easier to want to work hard for them because I
Yep.
know how hard they're working.
Man, I love talking about this stuff. Can you talk about the camaraderie of being on the team, the bus rides, the locker rooms, the hotel? I'm not talking, everybody, you talk to a lot of athletes and they almost never talk about the actual game.
hmm
Even though like your meets are super important, the game's important, but it's always the stuff that happens before and after. Can you talk about that as how you come together as a team and what that means to you?
Yeah, I say it all the time that, I've got my brother and my sister who are my siblings, but my team is like my siblings away from home.
Mm,
They're my best friends. We see each other at our best and our worst. And, you get so close that, if practice was hard, everybody's saying the same stuff in the locker room. If practice was great, everybody's happy together in the locker room. I mean, even after practice every day, my team has a tradition where we all go to the calf and we line up one big table and the men's and the women's team. We all sit together and eat breakfast every day.
that's great.
And, I mean, breakfast is borderline mandatory, but we also all end up sitting together at lunch and dinner too, and then we also, a lot of us, we all work jobs outside of here too. We work together or we hang out together, or we have classes together. And or on the bus rides, someone's got, on Spotify, they're queuing up music and they're taking suggestions from everybody. And, when a song comes on, they're like, hey, that's so and so's song.
Yeah.
Your teammates end up being your best friends. And they're, I all the time. And, 20, 30 years from now, I won't remember what time I went at a certain meet on a certain day or what
No.
set we did at practice, but you remember laughing, crying, everything in between with your
Yeah.
teammates. And, I think that's one of the most valuable things you take from any sport, but
Yeah.
especially swimming. I mean, my teammates also are from all over the world, which is really, really cool. This school has a huge international program. I mean, I've got teammates from England, Ireland, Italy, Bulgaria, Mexico, like everywhere, it
You got a place to stay all around the world.
I know. Well, that's the thing. I'm like, if I ever, you know, were to jump out of a plane and get stranded somewhere, there's a 50-50 shot. If I could get one of my teammates on the phone, they could tell me where I am.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And also those connections you make with your teammates. from what I'll know one way or another, in a few short months when I graduate, but like those are the connections that follow you.
Oh
Even my
yeah.
teammates from high school are some of my best friends now at home. And I imagine that's going to be the same, if not even stronger beyond college with my teammates now.
That is so cool. So, talking about that, you got a couple of months left
Yeah.
and it's over.
Yep.
What are you worried about, concerned with, anything when it's going to come to transitioning out of college, out of your athletic world into the real world? Any thoughts around that? Concerns, worries?
All the time. Funny enough, my coach had to, at our midseason meet this year, two of my races didn't go as well as I would have liked them to. And that was hard because I'm training really well, but they didn't, sometimes you just have an off day. And, I said to my coach right after, the first words that came out of my mouth were, I only have one more meet in the racing suits where we're rested to really have a go at this thing and drop more time. And, he had to take a step back and say to me, he was like, you need to live in the present because you're going to blink and it's going to be over either way.
Hmm.
So you got to, I know we talked earlier about people living in the past, but I'm fighting the opposite now. I'm fighting worrying every day about, it being over. My coach put up on the board yesterday that we had 47 practices left and did the math. And he said that's like 141 hours of training left. And, hearing that, like some of my teammates were like, oh my gosh, 141 more hours of this. And I was like, only 141 more hours of this, it's hard. And, it really has started to hit me that, I'm done after this. And I will say, hypothetically, that'll be a conversation for February once my meet is over. It started to creep up on me, the back of my head. I do have that red shirt year. But at the same time, I'm kind of at the point in my life where I have to be ready to make the best decision for my career after this. And if that's a graduate school somewhere else that doesn't have a swim program, that might be what I need to do. So in order to prepare for either situation, I've really started to try to dive into my interests outside of swim. I love forensic psychology. I think it's really interesting. So I'm very fortunate, but I work in the psychology research lab here. So I've started to try to get as involved there as I can. I'm starting an internship in January with the Hudson County Courthouse.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, because I was like, you know what, psychology's cool, but I also do really like criminal justice. That's my minor as well. So I was like, let me get a little experience there. And I really tried to just get excited about other things besides just swimming. There's going to be so much that happens in life, and I can always swim if I want to. It won't be the same, but I really tried to find other things that I can be just as passionate about after this to help.
Oh, it's so hard though, isn't it?
It is. I think about it daily and I think multiple times a day. You
Yeah.
know, like even I just asked because my last race will be the mile, which will be my last race ever, which I think that's almost poetic because I took such a break from the mile my sophomore year and my junior year because I was injured. It was only the end of my junior year and all of this year that I got back into it, which my coach and I are kind of kicking ourselves now. We're like, this has always been my best event. I don't know, I think that was a mental thing when I came back from,
Yeah.
2 years off that I was like, I can't do a mile again. There's no way. But, I think it's almost poetic that that's the event I'm going to end on. And I asked one of my teammates recently, one of the freshmen, I was like, can you count? Because someone puts a card in with the numbers on
Yeah.
it. Because I mean, sometimes in practice, if we're doing 8 laps, I lose track, let alone 66
Yeah.
laps. It's,
I don't know how you keep track of it.
it's hard, but, and sometimes we do 20 laps at practice and we don't, or not 20, 66, and we don't use the card. So you do have to try to count. But, in a race, they let you have somebody count for you to
Yeah.
make sure it's, accurate. But I asked her recently, I was like, cause you have to ask in advance based off who's got events that day. And I said to her, I was like, can you count for my mile? And I've only known this girl for 3 months. And she started crying because she was like, that's going to be your last race. And you want me to count for you? And then I started crying. So I was like, let's not talk about it. It is really hard. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm so grateful that if I'm sad after, it's because I don't want to let it go. you know, something that's so hard on you physically and mentally. To be so sad to let it go just means that I had, one hell of an experience over the last 15 years of swimming on a team.
So where is this last mile going to be?
It'll be at our conference meet. It's called Max. It'll be in Geneva, Ohio,
Okay,
at the Spire Institute, which is a sports facility.
that's cool. I'm sure your parents are going.
They are. My parents have been so incredible at coming to almost all of my meets, but something that really they shocked me with, which is really special this year, is they've made it to every single meet and they plan on coming to every single meet this year. I mean, they surprised me down in Baltimore in Maryland a couple of
Oh,
month or
you
two
didn't know
back.
they were coming?
No, they didn't tell me. Funny enough, I actually checked their because we have each other's location, which they used to use to spy on us in high school, but
Yeah,
now we
yeah,
use it because they don't answer their phones. But I actually checked their location and I saw my dad was moving, but I was like, oh, maybe he's got a business trip or something I don't know about. Like I usually end up
yeah,
hearing about that when he's there.
yeah,
And then I noticed, or my brother goes to school in Philadelphia. So I was like, maybe they're going to see my brother because we
yeah,
weren't out of New Jersey yet. But then we had just passed the last rest stop in, New Jersey leaving.
yeah,
And I saw my dad's car was there. And then I saw my mom's car was there, like on the app. And I
yeah,
was like, wait a minute. And I called my mom and they didn't, they had to give it up at that point. So I was like,
yeah.
where are you guys going? But that was so special to me. They were like, oh, we ruined the surprise. Like we should have turned our location
They should have
off.
turned it off. But
Yeah.
if they turn it off, then you can say, why is it off?
Yeah, exactly. But, even though I had figured it out, still I figured it out like 2 hours before the meet, it wasn't, but they've been so incredible this year and coming, and that was so special. And I think they're coming that's a 4-day meet. They're coming for the last 2 days and, they're going to be there to watch my last race, which I just know that, it'll be an emotional moment for everybody,
Oh
but the
yeah.
fact that they're coming to watch is going to be really special.
Yeah, I know your dad's been taking all kinds of pictures and posting it. Now, do you have anything local around here, or is that the last shot out there?
Well, we have a lot of meets before then. Some are in Jersey City. I think some are further away. We've got one at Montclair State coming up in January. So we're usually in New Jersey, but yeah, that'll be the last one, but far away. So
It'll be a big one. Well, good luck with handling that.
thank you.
Because that last day, man, when it's done, it's done. It's hard. It's
Yeah,
freaking hard.
it'll be special too. Only a few of my other teammates are going to do the mile that day, but my coach makes everybody come watch. So I think that'll be cool too because, sometimes, let's say in the shorter events that more people do, you've got your teammates all, they're warming up, they're warming down, they're racing, everybody cheers each other on, but there's a lot of stuff happening in between, but the mile
Yeah.
is so long that it's its own section. So, I know all of my teammates will be there watching and cheering for me too, which, like that'll be special too. Like knowing they're going to be there with me for my last race.
Oh, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Totally awesome. So how, a couple more questions. How has college athletics, you know, influenced what you want to do in the future at all?
I think college athletics and, swimming in college I think if there's one thing that I could say has set me up for the rest of my life, it's swimming in college. Between everything I've been through in college, or even I know we briefly talked about, all the struggles I had with coaches before that, you know, and now knowing, okay, I went from my 10-year plan to not knowing what I was doing to swimming here and swimming well and getting a degree. It's taught me that, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay because of the strength and the confidence that this sport has provided me with. And it also reminds me too that at the end of the day, I've got a lot of teammates, not only for here, but I've got teammates for life who I know we're going to be helping each other. And, it makes real life, everybody says real life starts after college. It makes real life a whole lot less scary knowing that I've gone through so much here and before here. And, and I will, everybody goes through a lot after too that, if I just chug through and, practice to practice day to day, do the same thing outside of here, I will probably be okay. And that, that's a nice feeling knowing, I've done it time and time again. So if something happens after college, I just gotta, I've been through something once, I've been through something twice, just keep pushing.
What you're going to find is when you get out of college, because of your experiences that you've gone through over all these years, mentally and physically, you're going to be sitting in a career somewhere, right? This is going to happen. Trust me. When it happens, I want you to call me up and tell me, you know, and you'll be next to somebody who is in the same type of position, career, wherever, who has not had an athletic career in college. And they're going to be saying, oh man, how difficult things are. Oh my God, this is so hard. And you're like, what? This is a piece of cake. What do you mean this is hard? After everything you've gone through, has prepared you for the hurdles, the challenges, the things you're going to deal with. When you get into the real world, you're going to see that your job is not that hard. But what I will tell you is going to be a challenge, and your mom and dad can tell you this, is the real world responsibilities are a lot more stressful than your job. It's like I got
Mhm.
kids I gotta feed. I gotta pay a mortgage. I gotta pay for all those kind of things. Those responsibilities, whew, boy, those add up. But your college athletic career is preparing you to help handle that pressure. You heard the whole scenario. Pressure is a privilege, right?
Hmm.
And just think of all the pressure you've been under
Yeah.
for all these years, hurdles you've jumped over, things you've accomplished, and you do great in school. It's incredible, right?
Yeah, it's, you hear the term online so much more nowadays, but and I always thought it was a joke, but I was like, no, I kind of understand, you hear the term imposter syndrome a lot,
Yeah,
especially in the adult world, college athletics, college in general, when you accomplish some of these things, you're like, all right, I did it, but I don't know how I did it. I don't know why I did it. And I don't know why I deserve, that wasn't me. Like, there's no way, or I don't deserve to be here. It's,
yeah.
you know, and, going into the real world, like, that's a feeling that, that's a phenomena that it doesn't go away, like, and I think it's important to, even for me personally, to remind myself, like I was talking to my parents about this and, like I just finished out this semester with a 4.0 GPA and,
Crazy.
I work in the research lab here. I'm the president of an honor society and the treasurer of another one. And, my mom had said, I'm applying to grad schools now, just starting the process. And, I keep saying to my mom, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get in. And my mom's
You don't
looking
know
at
if
me
you're
and
going
she's
to get
like,
in.
yeah, she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like a couple of the schools I'm applying to, forensic psych is very, it's not super common. So it's very competitive. And two of the
Okay.
schools I'm applying to have some of the top five best they're one of the top five best programs in the country for your master's for this. So, they're almost like the Ivies of like
Yeah.
forensic psych. And,
Right.
it's like, I hope I get in, but I should really have and now this is more, training from VMI kind of going upside down without a backup plan. I'm like, I should really have
Yeah.
a backup plan. But at the same time, my mom's looking at me and she's like, I've never seen you fail in one thing. You've really tried to, put your foot down and,
Yeah.
you know, that's not to say everybody fails at things, but she's like, I've never seen you not figure out what to do if something does or doesn't go the way it's supposed to.
Because
It's
you
like,
keep figuring it out.
yeah, and it's funny because, even talking about that, logically, I'm like, yeah, I did figure it out. But in my head is almost that imposter syndrome. I'm like, I don't know. It just kind of happened, like I'm like, it must have been a magical force. It wasn't me. So it's, that's
Well,
something that,
it's not magical, it's hard work. It's all the hard work you've put in, not just for this semester, this year, but for years, the work you've put in. And I coined a phrase a long time ago. I don't know if I heard it somewhere, stole it or whatever, but hard work finds good luck, and the
Mhm.
harder you work, the luckier you get, so what does the future look like for you? What you paint the picture 3, 4, 5 years from now, where are you? If you could, the dream job, the dream thing, what are you doing?
you know, that's a question that outside of swim is probably one of the most, I don't want to say challenging, but one of the things I ask myself every day. I know I'm applying to master's programs, but, and the goal there would, become a forensic psychologist and either work in, maybe the Department of Corrections and prisons and jails, or to work in a psychiatric hospital. But at the same time, I'm like, if I end up loving this courthouse internship, maybe, we're hoping to get me into like victims assistance, which would be helping, people who are going through, who have been victims of a crime, to counsel
Yeah.
them. So, you know, I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up yet.
The
It'll be
FBI,
some
maybe? How about the FBI?
from a young age. That before I wanted to go into the military, that was the dream. Um, I think now I'm got more of a, all right, we'll figure it out, but we don't need to know what's going to happen, 10 years from now. But what'll happen will happen, and it'll be where I'm meant to be. But that, that's up there in the back of my mind. There's a lot you have to do, and you have to have at least a degree, before you can even look at that, which I have looked at the requirements. So it is something I think about. But, we'll see also too. I've got a background in psychology and criminal justice. I've got a background in athletics and being fit. It's one of the, and I like helping people. It's definitely one of those jobs that, checks a lot of my boxes, like we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. So, I think in the next year or two, the image will be grad school, but beyond that, we'll see. I think it's going to be a matter of what I fall in love with again. And, you know, whatever happens, happens, but we'll find out. And I'm excited to see where I end up.
That's so cool. Listen, I always say don't be in a rush. But be patiently in a rush,
Hmm.
to get where you want to be, and don't wish your life away. And you said a couple of things before, but live in the present, which is really cool. So I've asked you a ton of questions. We've been going now for an hour and 45 minutes. It's a long time.
Yeah,
And
time
it,
flies when you're talking about
yeah.
interesting things.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you yet, Cassidy, that you think we should talk about before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think I kind of tiptoed around it before we started recording, but I think something that is really important for college athletes, but athletes in general, everybody talks about how hard, mental health or juggling things are, or, in college. But I think a lot of athletes don't realize that that stuff can start and will start way before college, and like my experience on my club team was that we had like a new head coach like every year or two. And that was something, I think that was one of the first struggles in swimming I really had, where, you develop this relationship with a coach who believes in you and was helping you, and then they leave. And then someone shows up and it's a new coaching style. You finally get used to it. You go, they're a great coach, and then they leave.
Yeah.
And, I think at the end of the day, it's important to remind yourself that you get where you got because you were the one who put the work in. You know,
Mm.
I've had coaches who, I had a coach leave to go coach like a rival team. And I didn't go with them. I had a coach who got arrested, and that was a shock. I had a coach, two coaches ended up quitting together because of, personal issues that they were having together, and, the YMCA didn't deem it appropriate. And I had a coach quit because of child endangerment questions on another team.
Yeah.
It was always a shock, for, you'd think after I'd been through it three, four, five times, I would have gotten used to it, but, I never saw it coming. And that was also my thing leading up to college. I was like, do I really want to go and have another coaching style, a new, and then when I went to commit to VMI, that coach quit before I got there. And then the coach who recruited me to St. Peter's quit before I got here. I start at this point, I laugh about it now, but I'm like, maybe it's me, man. Like, like it's following me, across states and teams. But, and now fortunately I've ended up with a coach who I actually have a long history with on my club team. And, and he's awesome and has stayed the 3 years I've been here. But I think, athletes, older in college and younger, need to give themselves more credit for what they're doing, because even if you don't view it as this was a huge issue at the time or this shaped who I am, the mental stamina to show up every day and keep doing it and to not quit something. Like I said, I've been swimming for 15 years. That's a long time. I'm
It's a
22.
long time.
Yeah, I'm 22. I've been swimming for 15 years. That's most of my life, you know. And despite all that, having the ability to not quit what you're doing despite everything, I think it's not a small feat that a lot of athletes, regardless of where they're at in their journey, whether it's before college, during college, or after college, don't give themselves enough credit for the sake of being humble. But at the same time, like, that says a lot about a person's character, you know. And I've seen it in my teammates who also stayed there and my teammates here where I hear about their stories too. Everybody who does sports, it's not a linear journey. It is up and down and up and down. And, I think that's part of the beauty of sports, but I think that's something too that people need to look back at what they've been through and,
Yeah,
be proud of that to some extent.
that's awesome. What a story. Woo. And you're coming towards the tail end of your athletic career, but you're in the infancy stages of the rest of your life. And there's so much for you to look forward to. And the great thing is I know your dad really well, and I'll get to hear about everything you're doing, firsthand. Which is great versus some of the other interviews that I've had. Like if I don't go out of my way to stay in touch with them, I don't really get to hear what's going on. But
Hmm.
your dad is like first thing coming in, telling me what's going on, which is great. And I look forward to hearing the updates. I'm like, what's going on with your daughter? What's new? And so which is really, really cool. Well, Cassie, listen, thank you for taking the time out of your crazy busy schedule to spend it with me and to tell your phenomenal story about your life and what you're accomplishing and where you're going. And it's just been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And it's my pleasure. And I can't wait to see the pictures from your dad. He'll probably do videos too, but when you are swimming your last mile, I am so looking forward to that.
I'm excited too. I think whatever pictures he gets from that race will definitely be the ones going in a frame in my room for
Oh
sure.
yeah. Well, Cassie, thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again in the pool.
Yeah, thank you.